Hey, been a while. Apologies for my appearance today, folks. Currently sitting outside the emergency room where my young son is being attended. Nothing too serious. We're a little worried he might have swallowed something. It's just been a bit colicky. But that's all good. It has been interesting to see up close again the rubbish that is the health system in this country. Any Americans who happen to see this, you do not want the government to be running your healthcare. You really don't. It's rubbish. It's a rubbish system. Uh, yeah. Anyway, they still got all their COVID protocols in, which is ridiculous when Gates himself says just the flu. So it's all tokenistic and procedural and rubbish. But what I'm here to talk to you today about, goodness me, what is that? Is the end of civility. Serious matter. Look at the numbers on the ABC's own website. And put your party allegiances aside, and you tell me if those numbers look like a majority, look like a democracy in action, look like representative government. We live in a two-party system, whether we like it or not. Everyone else is on one team or the other, or they're railroaded. This is broken. There has been talk of malfeasance, not on a conspiracy level, but just shitty behaviour from AEC officials telling old people not to vote independent, taking how to votes off people. There are some irregularities around pencils, and there's also a huge problem in this country. It's incredibly easy to vote twice. Incredibly easy. And in fact, in the last election, I forget which, there was something like 60,000. Might have been 6,000. I'm not sure. Whatever it was a staggering number, given that, the vote totals is something like 18 million votes. And out of something like 18 million votes, does 3.8 million sound like a majority? And okay, I understand that's not exactly how the system's supposed to work, but it's certainly not a mandate. It's certainly not a mandate that something like a fifth or a sixth of the adults in this country are going to dictate how the rest of us live. Now, we've got the glaring hypocrisy here of the inner city kids voting Green. That's entirely hypocritical. People who live in cities need energy for everything: heating, cooling, cooking. There's no food near you, it all comes in via diesel. You guys, because you live in concrete jungles, you use more power to heat and cool your homes than people who live out in the leafy suburbs or further afield, like myself. You don't understand that you are voting against yourself. You're not established in life. You don't have any nest egg. And you have just voted to increase your costs of living incredibly, more than double. Your power costs are going to double. Your food costs are going to go up in an incredible rate. Chicken is no longer being imported from Malaysia, a major source of our food. And whilst we don't rely on the Ukraine for wheat, many of our neighbours do. The Greens and the Labour Party are pretending that China is, one, not a threat, two, a fair player, and three, not a global human rights record holder, which it is. The Han supremacy, combined with the CCP, has resulted in the eradication of Chinese minorities. Something like 75 distinct peoples and language groups have been absorbed since the days of Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. Tibet is still occupied. Hong Kong is occupied despite its residents not wanting that. People in Nepal are displaced. Chinese displacement is all over the place, and everyone pretends that China's not an imperial power. Welcome to the South Pacific, where every nation has an elite of Chinese merchant class. They might not be in politics, but they're the wealthiest members in general of each community. It's a soft imperialism. It's a soft imperialism. Not only that, defending China is ridiculous. They don't have to pollute to produce the goods they produce the way they don't have to do any of it so unethically. But thanks to our governments in the West, it's impossible to compete with them to provide an ethical alternative. We also have the huge issue of this gas ban, which is utterly ridiculous. I myself do not support fracking to any degree. I believe it damages aquifers and it does a lot of horrible things. But every single sewage treatment plant in this country could be capturing natural gas that is gassing out as methane from all our waste, food waste, sewage waste, even medical waste. You can brew it up, cook it down, extract the gas, burn that, burns much cleaner than fossil fuels. It still outputs carbon dioxide, but it's carbon neutral in the fact that everything that's decomposing is gassing out into the atmosphere. You might as well turn a turbine. It's essentially the gas equivalent of hydroelectric. You're harnessing a natural product, doing its thing, and that gives you the energy, and it has the byproduct of reducing methane in exchange for CO2, which, as we all know, is what plants crave. We have a problem of a heat sink issue. Everywhere concrete should be leafed up as much as possible. Keeping the concrete in the shade can halve our temperature deficit here. Now, the bankers have got you to think it's all about carbon, but back in the day we knew the goal was to keep the temperature moderated. There's plenty we can do to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. We are almost at the stage where we can essentially hook a catalytic converter onto any CO2 output chimney from a power station or industrial plant, and with the right setup you can get graphene to layer itself on a platinum plate. As it comes out, you can capture the carbon and use it for energy storage and keep it in a safe form. This isn't Howard era carbon sequestration bullshit where you were basically putting a pressure bottle under the ground and hoping to hell it didn't fucking corrode or explode. Which would have made all your efforts in vain. This is a sensible option. Every commercial plant production nursery in the world that uses greenhouses and closed environments pumps CO2 into those nurseries so those plants grow. The biggest problems on the environmental front have never been CO2. It's deforestation. I mean, CO2 in the oceans is an issue, but atmospheric CO2 is not the big issue they're claiming. I personally think that carbon monoxide is a much bigger threat because it gets in and stops CO2 reuptake systems in the environment from working. They get clogged up, they get poisoned. In some cases, I'm sure the organisms die. Then they stop absorbing CO2 and getting that out, scrubbing that from the atmosphere and turning it into plant material or construction material and timbers. Any renewable ecological resource is made of CO2. If we reduce CO2 emissions, or we reduce CO2 in the atmosphere to a significant degree, we will see a reduction in plant growth, a reduction in food supply, but forests and biodiversity, because of the lack of the thing that... See, plants are the house for the forest. Plants are the house for the trees, the insects. They do a lot of work with the mycelium. You will be basically robbing the forest of its building material, so it would house less insects, house less animals, house less microbia. And you could cause an ecological collapse. You really could. But besides that, you got to ask yourself the question, why are the big oil companies pushing for a carbon tax? This whole thing has been hijacked. It's essentially the same as the lockdowns. The big companies are all for it because the little guys can't pay the compliance cost, and then they get a bigger slice of the pie. And we've seen this again and again. Rockefeller Oil. This is just typical. This is typical of the asset management class, the ambassadorial class. those who think they are our betters, when most of them are completely unproductive individuals. They're middlemen, double speakers, a bunch of fucking retards, really. We're seeing the media really pushing some nasty shit. For one thing, women in politics, if you want to be a representative, it's not about you. Personal attacks, they shouldn't matter to you. You're there to represent the people who elected you, okay? And if you're not tough enough to be in the big house and send young men off to die, maybe you should retire. Maybe you should retire. Maybe we should put you all politicians, in judges' robes. You don't take yourself into the house, you represent your people. And if you can't do that, if you're too busy representing party interests and other interests, such as international finance and commitments to non-democratic associations like the United Nations, and it's democratic for the ambassadorial class, but our UN ambassador doesn't consult the people. We don't appoint them. They're appointed by committee of our betters. They're unaccountable. I mean, my biggest awakenings have been around the economic stuff, you know, coming from a hippie, greeny, free love kind of fucked up perspective on how things are supposed to work. I didn't understand. Like, economy was a dirty word in the Howard years, you know? Anytime people talked about the economy, it was like, you're talking about the economy, you don't care about people. Well, the economy is the household. And just like what I was saying about the forests, no house, no people. If you were running a household, but you depended on everything to keep that household afloat, coming from your untrustworthy, two-faced, double-speaking neighbor who might turn on you at any second, would you say that's a secure house? That is not a secure house. I'd like everyone in the world to read The Art of War. It's about supply lines. If you want to live, not just if you want to win, if you want to live, it's about supply lines. The left has become insane, pushing for war, being blindly led. Like, anyone could step back and say that what's happening in Ukraine is not dissimilar to what happened in Syria. And when that happened, Russia, Syria's ally, got a little bit toey when we invaded. Now, I can understand Putin's action is not justified, but it's not unexpected, and it's not unprovoked. That's just ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. John Pilger himself said in 2015, I believe, in his fascinating and brilliant documentary, The Coming War on China, he explained that NATO has, since 2014, under the Hillary Clinton State Department, been creating a Cuban Missile Crisis. Romania, Poland, I think Lithuania, basically nuclear missiles, NATO member states pointed at Russia. And Vlad said a long time ago, keep this up, I'll have to do something. And we got to that point. The Maidan massacre is real. The Ukrainian Nazis are real. Galatian SS, Azov Brigade, that is very real. That is very real. Oh, Zelensky's a Jew, I couldn't support that. He's a Khazarian Jew. You'll see on the same flag with the Nazi insignia, that nice little curly device, which is the Khazarian logo. This isn't what you think it is. Life's more complicated, you know? Life is a little more complicated, and you're going to have to do some of your own research, because basically, I mean, the ABC is just a Reuters repeater. Reuters is owned by the same type of large asset management firms that own Pfizer, that own a lot of the US media, people like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Vanguard is the largest shareholder of our formerly government lab that's now making Pfizer medicines. And on top of that, two of the directors of that lab, I think it's called IPL, I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry. You can look it up, but two of those directors of that lab are also directors of the Reserve Bank of Australia. And if you don't smell some kind of fascism there, you're very wrong. You're very wrong. That's fascism. That's straight up fascism. That's government and private business taking your money without your consent to do something you didn't ask for, cutting out competition. There might be better COVID vaccines out there, but governments are in bed with these large asset management firms and their pets. And so you get what you're given and you shut the fuck up. Right? We also have seen a degradation in civility in this country. Degradation. Everyone's always talking about how sacred democracy is. But if you don't respect your fellow citizens and their differences of opinion, people like One Nation voters and UAP voters are just stupid and they shouldn't. Okay, start that fight. I don't support either of those factions. But they got over 500,000 votes and very little representation. Where the Greens got like 1.3 million votes and got 3 seats. You're going to see pushback. This is inevitable. It's a law of physics. You put people under pressure, eventually they're going to do something. There's going to be a big push to divide this nation along these grounds. Domestic violence, they're going to get cameras in your homes. These new consent laws are insane. They're insane. Just so many things. We didn't agree to this. This isn't a mandate. You've violated our rights over the last 2 years. And if you think a change of government is going to convince anyone on our side, and when I say our side, I don't mean red versus blue. We're black and yellow motherfuckers and we're coming up. We're coming up. And it's not something you can stop because you won't take the boot off. It's not even going to be organized. There's going to be disarray. You can bet there's going to be civil unrest. This was planned for. Why the fuck do you think police in a disarmed country are suddenly armed to the fucking teeth with millions of dollars of guns? Machine guns for an unarmed populace. They've been expecting civil unrest for quite some time. Why do you think there's no police retention? Okay? Ladies in the police force lasted 2 years. Men last 4. No one wants to be a pedophile protecting Nazi. No amount of spending on police recruitment and training centers is going to patch up what we see on the fucking news, what our friends went through. Why do you think they need the fucking foreign forces bill? They're going to create unrest through starvation and divisive narratives in the media. And when we start to stand up for ourselves, there will be a crackdown like you haven't seen. The last 2 years have been about marking us errant. We will not comply. We will not be robbed. We say no to the boot. This isn't a call to action. This is a warning to those in power that we are and remain men, and we will not be treated like slaves. Control always fails. Central planning always fails. It's simply a matter of how many bodies till you quit. We saw it all through the last century. 200 million dead for various flavors of central planning and government control. Government has become an expense that Australians cannot afford, and now it's a danger to our future. Government needs to get back in its box. A government is there to ensure your rights, to defend your land, and maybe at a stretch, build large-scale infrastructure projects that aren't in themselves profitable but lead to economic growth, such as ports and rail. And that is it. That's all they should do. If they step out of those bounds, if they decide that your rights are up for negotiation, and the same goes for the democratic process. Your rights are above the law. Your rights are above the democratic process. If 51% of people wanted to vote to make rape legal, it would still be reprehensible. It might be the law of the land, but it would not be right. You know this. We all know this. We all know this. And we're coming up on the limits. We're really coming up on the limits. Starvation will ensue. There's about 3 weeks until the world turns into complete chaos. And it's all in the guise to get a crackdown happening, to get unanswerable police in a martial law style roll out. And the goal is to take your shit. You will own nothing and you will be happy, right? These motherfuckers, they know that we're onto them. I'm pretty sure that Davos has never had a no-fly zone to conduct their conference before. But now they have a no-fly zone, secret police, they're harassing international independent journalists who are doing nothing wrong. The masks come off. The mask has come off. But, you worry about Albo's dog on Twitter. That's the key thing. You worry about some flags that went up to placate the indigenous who've been screwed again. I mean, even this indigenous house they're talking about adding to the parliament, do you think that won't be controlled and manipulated? Does anybody remember ATSIC? Right? As soon as they started doing the right thing, they got accused of all sorts. They dismantled that shit. Yeah, brothers and sisters, you're in it with the rest of us, man. This is still the crown, still looking down. Yeah. They want you to blame the white man. They want the white man to blame the black man or the Muslim. It's the crowned heads. It's the bankers that have done all of this. They stole this country. They dragged our asses here as political prisoners. They stomped the shit out of the locals, denied them their heritage. They're continuing to hide good black role models from young black men. If you don't play football, you don't get a look in. They don't want to see a family man running a construction company on TV. No. They want you to feel broken. They want you to feel like... And it's not just the indigenous. They do this to us all. This is called a color revolution. Divide and conquer. Get the little people to blame each other for their problems while we take their gold. Wow, this went on. This sure went on. The problem is, this country, by and large, is filled up, including myself, with adult children. Adult children dependent on big daddy government for every little thing. But the more you let government do, the less you will have, because everything has to be paid for. Everything. And what I've seen, as I've said before, the left wing comes in and opens up a public works project just in time for the right wing to come back in and privatize it. One hand washes the other. This is a uniparty system. Change of government? Not really. Red and blue makes purple. What colour do the AEC wear?